we sat down to discuss what appears to be a developing new world order. A lot of people seem to be very worried about Donald Trump as President of the United States. Are you worried?
Well, look, there are aspects of the campaign that obviously cause people concern, particularly in Europe over NATO, for example. Mm-hmm. But we've got to see how he governs. I mean, campaigns are one thing, governing's another. In the days since the election, the statements have been reasonable. I think there's a desire to reach out to people. Let's just see. I mean, it's too important for the whole of the world. This is the most powerful political position in the world, and we want the person who occupies it to be doing the right things, not just for America, but for the rest of the world.
So you think there's been perhaps a bit of knee-jerk reaction to the fear that's been expressed?
Look, it's been an extraordinary time, hasn't it? And for those of us on the other side of the pond who've just lived through Brexit, and now we've had another political earthquake, people like myself who've spent a lifetime in politics are sitting back and trying to analyse this, understand it, see where it goes. So, I won't pretend to you I wasn't surprised by what has happened over this past period, because I am. And what it means is not entirely clear to me yet, but there is a new reality. You've got to make sure that you come to terms with it. And I think the thing is as well, you've got to understand why these movements are happening, in which people are hitting back hard against what is perceived as an established order, as an elite, and a sense that there are people left behind by globalization who don't feel they've got a place in this new world, and someone who comes and articulates their concerns and their anxieties gets support. Now, the issue is how you then provide answers to these problems, because the anger is very easy to see and very easy to ride, but then the thing to do is to provide answers to that. Because otherwise, what happens is you have people with a huge sense of grievance, where their grievance is being played upon, but it's not being answered in the way it needs to be.
Played upon. Do you think their grievances have been played upon? And because obviously you're right, we're seeing this in more than just America. We saw it in Brexit. We're seeing it in a number of Western European countries.
I think the grievances are real. This
Right.
is where I would disagree with some of the analysis on the left. For example, people's anxieties about immigration, certainly in my country and in Europe, they're real. They're partly connected with the fact that we've had large flows of migration, communities start getting changed, people feel, they feel discomforted by that in some ways. And you need to understand that and why they feel like that. And then in Europe, particularly, if you've got large numbers of refugees coming, for example, from Syria, because of the civil war there, people also worry about the security aspects of that. So these are genuine fears. Now, how you respond to them is then the question. But I don't think you can dismiss them as...
How do you respond to them? On that point, on right. Immigration.
So my view is that you have to accept that immigration is a real concern for people, but the answer is to have rules but not prejudices. In other words, what people fear about immigration, who are completely reasonably minded, who are not bigots or prejudiced, what they fear is that this is happening without proper control and without proper oversight. Now,
and is it?
In some cases it is. Look, for us in Europe right now, we've got these large hundreds of thousands of people coming in. If you're going to a Greek island and you're then got a pathway into Europe, I don't think we can be sure of the integrity of the systems for evaluating those cases and so on. So in some cases, yes, it is justified.
Let me remind you of something you said about immigration, and it would have been in the 2005 campaign, where it became one of the major issues that played out for you as you headed towards re-election. I never want this to be an issue that divides our country, that sets communities against each other. It is the duty of government to deal with the issues of both asylum and immigration, but they should not be exploited by a politics that, in desperation, seeks refuge in them, that we never use these issues as a political weapon, an instrument of division and discord. Is that what we've witnessed here, that it has been used as a political weapon?
Yeah, I don't know. I think undoubtedly, particularly in the European context, I would say for sure. It's the simplest way to get a political party to a certain level of support in any set of opinion polls anywhere in Europe right now.
What about in the States?
And in
what
the
we
States,
just witnessed?
yeah, no, of course, absolutely. And so that whole issue to do with immigration is obviously a huge issue for people. So, if you take the politics of any European country at the moment, I mean, never mind the US and what we've just seen, if people feel that their communities and their societies are being changed without them almost being part of the debate about it and without them being engaged, then they will feel angry and fearful. And someone who comes along and says to them, right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop it all. That then has appeal. So this is why I say to you, in my view, and I think this is exactly the same on the economic and the social arguments, if the centre does not act in a strong, coherent way to say, yes, we understand, we're listening, but here's an answer to your problem, then there will be people who come along and can exploit and develop that anger and turn it into a very powerful political movement.
Well, of the countries we're talking about, whether it's the US, Britain, the Netherlands, Italy, Austria, France, Germany, where is the center right now? I mean, the center doesn't seem to be attracting any support.
So you're attracting support's a different thing. I personally believe the centre still has huge latent support, but the centre has become we've become about managing the status quo. The centre only works when the centre is the place where the change makers congregate.
All right, I hear you on what the centre needs to do, but meanwhile, what appears to be the right is on the march.
Yep.
And people are trying to gauge what happened in some of these countries, and certainly what happened last week. Was it populism? Was it nationalism? Was it fascism? I mean, where do you go?
Yeah, fascism, I think, is very important we don't get ahead of ourselves here. Populism, for sure. A sense particularly around issues like immigration, that the establishment wasn't listening, so it's important to send them a signal. But again, my point about this is very simple, right? The right way to protect people against the dangers of globalization, the displacement effects of it, is education, it's infrastructure. It's building the social capital in order to make sure that people can handle this era of change. It's not trying to tell somebody, in a seaside town of the UK that the way of protecting themselves against globalization is to throw some immigrant guy out of a job in London. I mean, this is not going to protect us.
This is a great honor for me. I am going right now to invite onto the stage the man behind Brexit and a man who led brilliantly the United Kingdom Independence Party in this fight and won despite all odds, despite horrible name-calling, despite so many obstacles. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
One of the leaders, the self-proclaimed leader of the Brexit movement, Mr. Farage, claims that we have seen the end of Blairism, we've seen the end of Bushism, and we've seen the end now of Clintonism, and he claims some credit for that. Have we seen the end of those three?
I don't know whether you've seen the end of the three individuals, but the philosophy, no, of course not. It still remains the most sensible way of governing, certainly from the perspective of the progressives. The only way you're going to govern sensibly is for the progressive side of politics, as I say, to be providing answers to people. But
he seems to suggest that those three isms have been rejected and are being rejected in election after election.
These guys are like Nigel Farage. Their view of Britain is Britain outside Europe, shutting the door to immigrants. It's a sort of quasi-nationalistic policy, even around the economy. It won't work. And it's totally contrary to the values and spirit that a country like Britain needs for the 21st century. 21st century belongs to the open-minded. Right? Why is Canada a great country? Why is Canada a country which is a country that I would say is one of the most admired countries in the world? It's because as a country, the spirit of the country is one of openness to the world.
But those tensions are playing out in Canada right now as well.
Yeah, and they will do. But they haven't disrupted the country in the same way, and I hope they don't. And, once these issues start to become real issues in the political arena, they do have a very divisive effect. And, you've got to hope in the case of Canada that doesn't happen, because many people will look upon Canada and say, well, look, you're a country that's got people of different faiths and cultures and races living together in what appears to be reasonable harmony. Keep that.
Does it concern you that over this first weekend as president-elect, Donald Trump has brought into the inner sanctum Nigel Farage to give him advice on international relations, especially as it comes to Britain and Europe?
I mean, I'm not sure how much advice has been given, but I think it's not surprising well,
he's there, you're not there.
No, exactly. And it's not surprising he sees someone who supported him very strongly in the campaign. I mean, I think you would expect that. But the the British relationship is very strong. I'm sure it'll carry on strong. And, I'm sure that President-elect Trump will want to keep it strong. So,
The Trump relationship with Putin, how concerned are you about Russia's place in this developing world?
So here's the thing, it'll be very interesting to see how all this plays out. Every president, every prime minister wants to reset the relationship with Russia and have a good relationship. Why? Because it's a huge country, it's got a lot of interests, and if Russia's on side, the world's easier to manage. The trouble is, to establish this relationship with Russia, which I agree is optimum to do for all sorts of reasons, you've got to have some give and take on both sides. And the difficulty is where Russia, for example, says in relation to Ukraine, well, we decide their future. And however much you want to reach out and have a great relationship, at some point, if you adhere to democratic values, you've got to say, well, I'm sorry, we can't agree with that. So I'm all in favor of trying on Russia. And I believe that if the West can get the right relationship with Russia, this will be enormously important for the world.
But he seems to be suggesting that the fight against ISIS is all that matters right now to America. And if it means leaving Assad alone, if it means forgetting about Crimea, then that's okay.
Yeah, but the trouble is, what you find with Syria is if the price of that is Assad stays in power, then he's going to be staying in power with the largest majority of the population thinking that's completely unacceptable. Now, whether you think that's a good idea or a bad idea, it's not going to work. Likewise, with Crimea, okay, I mean, I think the world's come to terms with Crimea.
It's come to terms with Crimea?
I think probably it has. I think that's the reality. Okay, but...
So stop fighting that issue?
Well, the world has stopped fighting that issue, by the way. But whether it's fighting ISIS or, making sure that you keep the world stable, you're making sure you don't have nuclear proliferation, the Russia relationship's fantastically important. All I'm saying is many of us have tried to put that in the right frame and have found you come to a point where the choices you're being asked to make are very hard.
Trump says that, or said during the campaign, that Clinton and Obama created ISIS. They said, hey, wait a minute, ISIS was created because of Al-Qaeda, which was created because of the invasion of Iraq. You know that story all
right,
too well.
I do.
Now, do you accept any blame for the eventual formation of ISIS?
Look, I've gone through these issues a thousand times. I tell you exactly what I say. I say I'm always going to accept responsibility for the decision we took to remove Saddam. I just point out that ISIS was beaten in Iraq in 2010. It was the Arab Spring, what happened in Syria, that allowed it back off the ground again, coupled with the sectarianism of the Maliki government. And if you get rid of ISIS, you're still going to have a score of other terrorist groups you're going to have to deal with. If you get rid of those, you've still got the basic fundamental problem, which is that out of the Middle East has come an ideology based on a perversion of religion, this Islamist philosophy. And, yes, you can defeat groups like ISIS, but you won't defeat the problem.
You're in a unique position. You've been in the room. You've had to make tough decisions, sending a country to war, making difficult decisions about, economics. When you look at the new president of the United States, do you see someone who has had no political experience, no military experience? Does it worry you that he now will be making those kind of decisions from the pulpit of the most powerful leader in the world?
The experience issue doesn't worry me. Look, I'll be very frank with you. I was open with people during the campaign. I've known Hillary Clinton for over 20 years. I like her very much. I admire her very much. I was, in favor of her becoming the president. I mean, I'm not concealing that. And I think the fact that he has not, he's not had political experience, that doesn't trouble me so much because he's had plenty of experience of real life and taking decisions and running things.
But he does have a record. He has said things.
Yeah, no, I'm not, but we're here, this is where we are today. Okay, so let's wait and see, is all I say. It's not sensible to, there's no point, put it like this, there's no point in condemning him before he's even started. I mean, let's see how it works out. My concern is more with politics and what the whole thing says about the political situation that we've got. I mean, I'll never forget one of the things that one of the big backers of Brexit said after the successful campaign. And he was asked, well, what was the problem with the people the Remain campaign, the people who wanted to stay in Europe? And he said, the problem with these people is they were always on about facts. Facts, 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 he said. That's not how you win anymore. And, yeah, well, that's not a good idea. I mean, we're going to have to work out how in that social media world where frankly it's the most extreme thing that you can say that gets the most play in that world, you're going to have to work out.
Post-truth world.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like it can reduce politics to a set of headlines, and it can reduce politics to self-conforming groups of people who never talk to each other. So that you end up in today's world with a very polarized political system. And, I think we are only at the beginning of this populist surge. We're not anywhere near through it or at the end of it.
That's quite something to say.
Well, I think that's probably true. And my only fear about it is that sometimes you've got to live through something to realize what's wrong with it.
Hyperbole pranced rampant in Britain today as Tony Blair entered Downing Street on foot and in triumph. The youngest prime minister in almost 200 years, the biggest Labour majority, the most crushing Conservative defeat in a century and a half. He announced the arrival of a new caring government,
in which our ambition for ourselves is matched by our sense of compassion and decency and duty towards other people. Simple values, but the right ones.
Last point, and you kind of raised it yourself over these last few weeks and months, and that's your own role in perhaps getting back to the center. Do you want back in active politics?
I don't think I can go back to the front line. I mean, I've got too much...
You don't think you can, or you don't want to go back?
Well, I don't... It's not something I've given consideration to. What I'm thinking about is how do I help facilitate what I think is the right policy debate and build the right networks to allow people in the centre ground to interact with each other and work out how we deal with this new populism, left or right, in the most effective way. Look, I've got a situation in Britain where the British Labour Party is now, way removed from the politics that I was part of when we were going for government, and unfortunately we're now way behind in the opinion polls. What
if they came to you and said, Tony Blair, you're the only way out for us here now.
I think that's highly unlikely, I may say, with the, with the current membership of the party. No, I just want to make sure that people understand there is another option, and that is from the centre.
But doesn't another option need the personality of a leader? I mean, what happened in the States clearly was sitting there, and somebody need to sort of capture it. And this most unlikely of candidates did.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, you always eventually need a standard bearer. But I think we're not at that stage yet. And I think there's just a huge job to be done in creating that forward, what I would call open-minded approach to the world. Because that's the political division today. The political division is much less between sort of left and right. They've got now their traditional positions. But funnily enough, today, at a certain point, they meet each other. You know, they tend to be isolationist. Okay, the left's anti-business, the right's anti-immigrant, but in their worldview, it's closed-minded. And if you want the open-minded to win, we've got to capture the policy agenda and build the networks of support. And I still believe the centre ground's where the majority of people want to be. Even in that American election, it's where the majority want to be. But you've got to give them the belief that that centre ground is a place that can provide change, and not a place where people just kind of say, well, just leave it to us to manage.
Well, we'll see where it all ends up. As always, good to talk to you.
Thank you.